Hi. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So my name's Ariel, and I am reading a letter from Robert Coover to William Gass. And they were contemporaries of one another and very important postmodernists who are also very important to me as a writer. Gass, of course, as many of you know, is an institution like WashU, at WashU, and it's because of the gift of his manuscripts that I'm able to read this letter. So Coover is responding to a review that Gass wrote of one of his books. And in the letter, he describes reading an essay by Borges, about Borges by Gass, with that special enjoyment caused by the linking of two favored writers in one discourse. And of course, always the postmodernists. I'm sure he couldn't imagine that would have been meta-narrative, but that's how I sort of feel reading this letter between the two of them. So I guess I'll just begin. And this is dated 30th of November, 1969, coming from Kent, England. Dear Bill, since your review of Prick Songs appeared, I've been at somewhat of a loss how to express that mix of gratitude, admiration, amusement, relief, justification, humility, etc. it aroused. I'm better at irony and at dissolution. In fact, without that etc., I wouldn't have got this far. I had more invested, emotionally anyway, in that book than the two earlier ones, yet it was only stories, as the Mafia says, and half rejects at that. I'd only been able to get about half of them in print, and that after a lot of trying, so I had no reason, except my own arrogance in the name, design, letter, etc., and act with as much self-abasement in it as presumption, actually, like all such insolence, to expect anything except an unembarrassed silence. So I was moved you should read it at all, more so that you should review it, all but undone by the extent of your involvement in it and the revelations, to me, you emerged with. Not to mention the comedy. I mean, I wrestled that babysitter through 30 or 40 pages and failed to find a juxtaposition half so funny as your, or it has the quality of an image on the oblong, etc., down over her squirming hips. I'm still trying, you can see. Anyway, thanks, not for flattering me, which you did, but for casting light on the book and giving it a chance in the world, and thereby letting me forget about it and go back to work again. I think I may have told you somewhere, somehow, that I've been a reader of yours since the days when the accent people, friends of mine then, I was in grad school at the University of Chicago, were first considering an all-gas issue, and in fact, I still have a prized copy of that issue. One of those editors, now a professor at Bradley, this week sent me your essay on Borges, New York Review, which I read with that special enjoyment caused by the linking of two favored writers in one discourse. I met Borges at Iowa nearly 2 years ago when he came to lecture on Kipling. I foretold, on hearing of it, it would be a lecture on Fred Kipling, but was disappointed, of course, and participate in a couple colloquia. He looks at you over your shoulder and makes fluttery, aristocratic motions with his hands, combined with a trembling wiping of his nose and mouth that the three penny beggars would do well to imitate. He's an extraordinarily witty and subtle conversationalist, as perhaps you know from experience yourself, as much of his style he credits to his own maestro, Macedonio Fernandez, a wonderful conversador de pocas palabras, a kind of Quixote-esque, the elderly Quixote, figure of great and humorous character, whose own writings need the presence of his personality. He was at the time working on a movie script inspired by Fernandez's personality, in which there is a city under siege. There is a group of intellectuals who gather every evening for conversation, and they discuss what they should do about the invaders, who remain anonymous but always very terrible, engage in missions against the enemy, etc. There is one mission which requires that one of them must die, and who this man is to be is quite obvious and necessary, even that he shall volunteer for it, and the whole film occurs in this one drawing room. Did you know that Borges was among the first to translate Kafka into Spanish? In one of his stories, there's a sacred latrine named Kafka, spelled Q-A-P-H-Q-A. Of course, he considers Stevenson subtler than Chesterton, even greater than Kafka. As for Kipling, he was the man who discovered time in a Roman coin found in Sussex. He explained that his blindness was the main reason he wrote very short fictions. He could keep them whole in his head while he worked them out. He claimed to rewrite this way for months at a time, and it's true he can quote easily and at length, in Spanish and English, from his own works, and from all his favorite novelists and idealists as well. Incidentally, when asked, he confessed he was, unfortunately, an Aristotelian, and somewhere he has called philosophy, theology, and history branches of fantastic literature. You mentioned the apparent paradox in his political attitudes, but he's actually pretty consistent there, and even political for all his demurrals, Why protest the bomb? We're all going to die anyway. He said that. Being very thoroughly, as you say, a skeptical conservative, a liberal in Latin American idiom, favoring the aristocracy of the gentle. As for Perón, remember that Perón came on as a revolutionary, basically fascistic, to be sure, but a demagogue of the working classes, and still worshipped by many of them. It's common in Argentina to find communists who are also Peronistas. And you're right, Borges is as proud, vain, as he is humble, and he can make some pretty sour and petty remarks about Asturias, for example, who won the Nobel in the year of the Inditos when it was clearly between him, Borges, and Neruda. He has a similar antipathy to Beckett, with whom he had to share the prix for Mentor some years back, and whose own Nobel now must really be nodding the old man's meek belly, and to whom he does not like to be compared. He apparently made a big show of going to Waiting for Godot in Buenos Aires, sat halfway back with his blindness, kept mumbling questions, what were the actors doing, and walked out before the play was over. Now, when he came to Iowa City, he was with his wife, a fairly recent bride, I believe, by legend his childhood sweetheart, for whom he had waited all his life. She had married another, and he had sat it out until the rival died of old age. All through his bachelor life, he had lived with his mother, who read to him in several languages and took dictation. Again, so runs the legend. At any rate, his widow wife may have well had the flaming megrims at the time, or popping veins, or dysentery, but more likely it was just her own sweet self. But she was one of the sorriest, meanest-souled people I've ever known. Please don't repeat that carelessly. All of which might have served as a typical Borgian romance, but she lacked the irony for it, and he was only sweetly obstreperous. By the way, his childhood memories were of the garden, books, etc., but especially of the illustrations in books, which might explain his love for Stevenson and Kipling. In Iowa, he said he was leaving labyrinths behind, that there were other things in the world, and he wanted to leave a Ricardo more serene, more varied and rich, less monotonous, so he was turning now to realistic stories about people, things, and places he knew, though as he moved into a more detailed explanation of his project, it was clear he meant by realism something quite removed from the convention. Still, I did see in Atlantic not too many months ago a short thing which may have been part of this new direction, and it struck me as being pretty awful. Somewhere I read, by the way, that under Perón he was made a chicken inspector, but that must surely be part of the legend, too. Perón's, I mean, not Borges. Idea for a frightening review. Well, off to read to the children who are shouting up from below. This week, it's The Little Prince. On my desk, Levi Strauss, a spy novel, and The Trial of Dr. Spock. Consequences. Thanks again for writing about the book. The only thing that's happened better for it has been a group of reviews attacking it as incomprehensible and politically irrelevant and lumping me in with those other eccentric unredeemables, Borges, Barth, Nabokov, Barthelme, and Gass. Warmest regards, Bob.